The Notebook, Gina Bellina's. While Noah was in New Jersey, he would visit his father once a year around Christmas. They'd spend some time fishing, talking. Once in a while, they'd take a trip to the coast to go camping. In December 1941, when he was 26, the war broke out. Just as Goldman had predicted, Noah walked into his office the following month and informed Goldman of his intent to enlist. And then he went to say goodbye to his father. 5 weeks later, he found himself in boot camp. While there, he received a letter from Goldman thanking him for his work with a copy of a certificate entitling him to a small percentage of the scrapyard if it ever sold. "I couldn't have done it without you," the letter said. "You're the finest young man who ever worked for me, even if you aren't Jewish." He spent his next 3 years with Patton's Third Army, tramping through deserts in North Africa and forests in Europe with 30 pounds on his back, his infantry unit never far from action. He watched his friends die around him, watched as some of them were buried thousands of miles from home. Once, while hiding in a foxhole near the Rhine, he imagined he saw Ali watching over him. He remembered the war ending in Europe and then a few months later in Japan, and just before he was discharged, a lawyer in New Jersey representing Morris Goldman let him know that Goldman had died and his estate liquidated, and the business had been sold, and Noah, just as promised, had given him a check for almost $70,000. For some reason, he was oddly unexcited about it. The following week, he returned to New Bern and bought the house. He remembered bringing his father around later, showing him what he was going to do, pointing out the changes he intended to make. His father seemed weak as he walked around, coughing, wheezing. Noah was concerned, but his father told him not to worry, assuring him that he had only the flu. But a month later, his father died of pneumonia and was buried next to his wife. Noah tried to stop by regularly to leave some flowers. Occasionally he left a note, and every night without fail he took a moment to remember him, then said a prayer for the man who taught him everything that mattered. After reeling in the line, he put the gear away and went back to the house. His neighbor, Martha Shaw, was there to thank him, bringing 3 loaves of homemade bread and some biscuits in appreciation for what he'd done. Her husband had been killed in the war, leaving her with 3 children and a tired shack of a house to raise them in. Winter was coming. He'd spent a few days at her place, repairing a roof, replacing broken windows and sealing the others, fixing her wood stove. Hopefully, it would be enough to get them through. When she'd left, he got in his battered Dodge truck and went to see Gus. He always stopped there when he was going to the store because Gus's family didn't have a car. One of the daughters hopped up and rode with him, and they did their shopping at Capers General Store. And when he got home, he didn't unpack the groceries right away. Instead, he showered, found a Budweiser, a book by Dylan Thomas, and went to sit on the porch. She still had trouble believing it, even as she held the proof in her hands. It had been in the newspapers at her parents' house 3 Sundays ago. She had gone to the kitchen to get a cup of coffee, and when she returned to the table, her father had smiled and pointed at a small picture. "Remember this?" He handed her the paper, and after an uninterested first glance, something in the picture caught her eye, and she took a closer look. "It can't be," she whispered, and when her father looked at her curiously, she ignored him, sat down, read the article without speaking. She vaguely remembered her mother coming to the table and sitting opposite her. And when she finally put aside the paper, her mother was staring at her with the same expression her father had just moments before. "Are you okay?" her mother asked when her coffee cup. "You look a little pale." She didn't answer right away. She couldn't, and it was then that she noticed her hands were shaking. That had been when it started. "And here it will end one way or the other," she whispered again. She refolded the scrap of paper and put it back, remembering that she had left her parents' home later that day with the paper so she could cut out the article. She read it again before she went to bed that night, trying to fathom the coincidence. She read it again the next morning, as if to make sure the whole thing wasn't a dream. And then, after 3 weeks of long walks alone, after 3 weeks of distraction, it was the reason she'd come. When she'd asked, she said her erratic behavior was due to stress. It was the perfect excuse everyone understood, including Lon, that's why he hadn't argued when she'd waited to get away for a couple of days. The wedding plans were stressful to everyone involved. Almost 500 people were invited, including the governor, one senator, and the ambassador to Peru. It was too much, in her opinion, but their engagement was news and had dominated the social pages. Occasionally, she felt like running away with Lon to get married, without the fuss. But she knew he wouldn't agree. Like the aspiring politician he was, he loved being the center of attention. She took a deep breath and stood again. "It's now or never," she whispered, and then she picked up her things and went to the door. She paused only slightly before opening it and going downstairs. The manager smiled as she walked by, and she could feel his eyes on her as she left and went to her car. She slipped behind the wheel, looked at herself one last time, and then started the engine and turned onto Front Street. She wasn't surprised that she still knew her way around town so well. Even though she hadn't been here in years, it wasn't large, and she navigated the streets easily. After crossing the Trent River in an old-fashioned drawbridge, she turned onto a gravel road and began the final leg of her journey. It was beautiful here in the Low Country, as it had always been. Unlike the Piedmont area where she grew up, the land was flat, but it had the same silty, fertile soil that was ideal for cotton and tobacco. Those two crops and timber kept the towns alive in this part of the state. And as she drove along the road outside town, she saw the beauty that had been there and that had attracted people to this region. To her, it hadn't changed at all. Broken sunlight passed through water, and hickory trees, 100 feet tall, illuminating the colors of fall. And on her left, a river, the color of iron, veered toward the road and then turned away before giving up its life on a different, larger river another mile ahead. The gravel road itself wound its way between antebellum farms, and she knew that for some of the farmers, life hadn't changed since before their grandparents were born. The constancy of the place brought back a flood of memories, and she felt her insides tighten as one by one she recognized landmarks she'd long since forgotten. The sun hung just above the trees on her left, and as she rounded a curve, she passed an old church abandoned for years, but still standing. She had explored it that summer, looking for souvenirs from the war between the states. And as her car passed by the memories of that day, the memories became stronger, as if they just happened yesterday. A majestic oak tree on the banks of the river came into view next, and the memories became more intense. It looked the same as it had back then, branches low and thick, stretching horizontally along the ground, with Spanish moss draped over the limbs like a veil. She remembered sitting beneath the tree on a hot July day with someone who looked at her with a longing that took everything else away. And it had been at that moment that she'd first fallen in love. He was 2 years older than she was, and as she drove along this roadway in time, he slowly came into focus once again. He always looked older than he really was, she remembered thinking. His appearance was that of someone slightly weathered, almost like a farmer coming home after hours in the field. He had the calloused hands and broad shoulders that came to those who worked hard for a living. And the first faint lines were beginning to form around the dark eyes that seemed to read her every thought. He was tall, strong, with light brown hair and handsome in his own way, but it was his voice that she remembered most of all. It had read to her that day, read to her as they lay in the grass beneath a tree with an accent that was soft and fluent, almost musical in quality. It was the kind of voice that belonged on radio, and it seemed to hang in the air when he read to her. She remembered closing her eyes, listening closely, and listening and letting the words he was reading touch her soul. It coaxes me to the vapor and the dusk. I depart on air. I shake my white locks at the runaway sun, he read. He thumbed through old books with dog-eared pages, books he'd read 100 times. He'd read for a while, then stop, and the two of them would talk, and she would tell him what she wanted in her life, hopes and dreams for the future. And he would listen intently and then promise to make it all come true. And the way he said it made her believe him, and she knew then how much he meant to her. Occasionally, when she asked, he would talk about himself or explain why he had chosen a particular poem and what he thought of it. And at other times, he just studied her in that intense way of his. They watched the sun go down, ate together under the stars. It was getting late by then, and she knew her parents would be furious if they knew where she was. At that moment, though it really didn't matter to her, all she could think about was how special the day had been, how special he was. And as they started toward her house a few minutes later, he took her hand in his, and she felt the way it warmed her. The whole way back. And then, in the distance, the house had changed dramatically from what she remembered. She slowed the car as she approached, turning into the long, tree-lined dirt drive that led to the beacon that had summoned her from Raleigh. She drove slowly, looking toward the house, and took a deep breath when she saw him on the porch, watching her car. He was dressed casually. From a distance, he looked the same as he had back then. For a moment, when the light from the sun was behind him, he almost seemed to vanish into the scenery. The car continued forward, rolling slowly, then finally stopped beneath an oak tree that shaded the front of the house. She turned the key, never taking her eyes from him. He stepped off the porch and began to approach her, walking easily, and then suddenly stopped cold as she emerged from the car. For a long time, all they could do was stare at each other without moving. Allison Nelson, 29 years old and engaged, a socialite searching for answers she needed to know, and Noah Calhoun, the dreamer, 31, visited by the ghost that had come to dominate his whole life. Reunion. Neither one of them moved as they faced each other. He hadn't said anything. His muscles seemed frozen, and for a second she thought he didn't recognize her. Suddenly she felt guilty about showing up this way without warning, and this made it harder. She had thought it would be easier somehow, that she would know what to say, but she didn't. Everything that came into her head seemed inappropriate, somehow lacking. Thoughts of the summer that they'd shared came back to her, and as she stared at him, she noticed how little he'd changed since she'd last seen him. He looked good, she thought, with his shirt tucked loosely into his old faded jeans. She could see the same broad shoulders she remembered so well, tapering down to narrow hips and a flat stomach. He was tan, too, as if he'd worked outside all summer, and though his hair was a little thinner and lighter than she remembered, he looked the same as he had when she'd known him last. When she was finally ready, she took a deep breath and smiled. "Hello, Noah. It's good to see you again." Her comment startled him, and he looked at her with amazement in his eyes. And then, after shaking his head slightly, he slowly began to smile. "You too," he stammered. He brought his hand to his chin, and she noticed he hadn't shaved. "It's really you. Really. I can't believe it." She heard the shock in his voice as he spoke, and surprising it all came together, being here, seeing him. She felt something twitch inside, something deep and old, something that made her dizzy. For just a second, she caught herself fighting for control. She hadn't expected this to happen, didn't want it to happen. She was engaged now. She hadn't come here for this, yet the feeling went on despite herself, and for a brief moment she felt 15 again. Felt as she hadn't in years, if all her dreams could still come true. Felt as though she'd finally come home. Without another word, they came together, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And he put his arms around her, drawing her close, and they held each other tightly, making it real. Both of them letting the 14 years of separation dissolve in the deepening twilight. They stayed like that for a long time before she finally pulled back to look at him. Up close, she could see the changes she hadn't noticed at first. He was a man now. His face had lost the softness of youth. The faint lines around his eyes had deepened, and there was a scar on his chin that hadn't been there before. There was a new edge on him. He seemed less innocent, more cautious. And yet the way he was holding her made her realize how much she'd missed him. Her eyes brimmed with tears as they finally released each other. She laughed nervously under her breath while wiping the tears from the corners of her eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked, 1,000 other questions on his face. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cry." "It's okay. I still can't believe it's you. How did you find me?" She stepped back, trying to compose herself. "I saw the story on the house in the Raleigh paper a few weeks ago, and I had to come to see you again." "I'm glad you did." He stepped back just a bit. "God, you look fantastic. You're even prettier now than you were then." She felt the blood in her face just rush, just like 14 years ago. "Thank you. You look great too." And he did, no doubt about it. The years had treated him well. "Well, what are you up to? Why are you here?" His questions brought her back to the present, making her realize what could happen if she wasn't careful. Don't let this get out of hand, she told herself. The longer it goes on, the harder it's going to be. And she didn't want to get any harder. She didn't want it to. But God, those eyes, those soft, dark eyes. She turned away and took a deep breath, wondering how to say it. And when she finally started, her voice was quiet. Noah, before you get the wrong idea, I did want to see you again, but there's more to it than just that. She paused for a second. I came here for a reason. There's something I have to tell you. What is it? She looked away and didn't answer for a moment, surprised that she couldn't tell him just yet. In the silence, though, Noah felt a sinking feeling in his stomach, whatever it was. Oh, it was bad. I don't know how to say it. I thought I did at first, but now I'm not so sure. The air was suddenly rattled by the sharp cry of a raccoon, and Clem came out from under the porch, barking gruffly. Both of them turned at the commotion, and Allie was glad for the distraction. Is he yours? Noah nodded, feeling the tightness in his stomach. Actually, it's a she. Clementine's her name. But yeah, she's all mine. They both watched as Clem shook her head, stretched, and wandered toward the sounds. What happened to her leg? She asked, stalling for time. Hit by a car a few months back. Doc Harrison, the vet, called me to see if I wanted her because, her owner didn't want her anymore. After I saw what had happened, I guess I couldn't let her be put down. You were always nice like that. She paused and then looked past him toward the house. You did a wonderful job restoring it. It looks perfect, just like I knew it would someday. He turned his head in the same direction as hers, while he wondered about the small talk and what she was holding back. Thanks, that's nice of you. It was quite a project, though. I don't know if I would do it again. Of course you would, she said. She knew exactly how he felt about this place, but then she knew how he felt about everything. Or at least she had a long time ago. And with that thought, she realized how much had changed since then. They were strangers now. She could tell by looking at him, could tell that 14 years apart was a long time. Too long? What is it, Allie? He turned to her, compelling her to look. I'm being rather silly, aren't I? She asked, trying to smile. What do you mean? This whole thing, showing up out of the blue, not knowing what I want to say, you must think I'm crazy. You're not crazy. He reached for her hand, and she let him hold it as they stood next to one another. He went on, even though I don't know why, I can see that this is hard for you. Why don't we go for a walk, like we used to? Why not? I think we both could use one. She hesitated, looked at his front door. Do you need to tell anyone? He shook his head. No, there's no one to tell. It's just me and Clem. Even though she'd asked, she had suspected there wouldn't be anyone else. And inside, she didn't know how to feel about that. But it did make what she wanted to say a little harder, and it would have been easier if there was someone else. They started toward the river and turned on a path near the bank. She let go of his hand, surprising him, and walked on with just enough distance between them so that they couldn't accidentally touch. He looked at her. She was pretty still, with thick hair and soft eyes, and she moved so gracefully that it almost seemed as though she were gliding. He'd seen beautiful women before, though, women who caught his eye, but to his mind they usually lacked the traits he found most desirable. Traits like intelligence, confidence, strength of spirit, passion, traits that inspired others to greatness, traits he aspired to himself. Allie had those traits, he knew, and as they walked now, he sensed them once again lingering just beneath the surface. A living poem had always been the words that came to mind when he tried to describe her to others. How long have you been back here? Since last December. I worked up north for a while, then spent the last 3 years in Europe. She looked to him with questions in her eyes. The war. He nodded and she went on. I thought you might be there. I'm glad you made it out okay. Me too. Are you glad to be back home? Yeah, my roots are here. This is where I'm supposed to be. But what about you? He asked the question softly. It was a long moment before she answered. I'm engaged. He looked down when she said it, suddenly feeling just a bit weaker. So that was it. That's what she needed to tell him. Congratulations. When's the big day? 3 weeks from Saturday. Lon wanted a November wedding. Lon Hammond Jr., my fiance. He nodded, not surprised. The Hammonds were one of the most powerful and influential families in the state, cotton money. Unlike that of his own father, the death of Lon Hammond Sr. had made the front page of the newspapers. I've heard of them. His father built quite a business. Did Lon take over for him? No, he's a lawyer. He has his own practice downtown. With his name, he must be busy. He is. He works a lot. He thought he heard something in her tone, and the next question came automatically. Does he treat you well? She didn't answer right away, as if she were considering the question for the first time. And then, yes, he's a good man, Noah. You would like him. Her voice was distant when she answered, or at least he thought it was. Noah wondered if it was just his mind playing tricks on him. How's your daddy doing? Oh. He passed on earlier this year, right after I got back. Oh, I'm sorry. Knowing how much he had meant to Noah. He nodded and the two walked in silence. They reached the top of the hill and stopped, and the oak tree was in the distance with the sun glowing orange behind it. Allie could feel his eyes on her as she stared in that direction. A lot of memories there, Allie. She smiled. I know. I saw it when I came in. Do you remember the day we spent there? Yes. Do you ever think about it? Sometimes. Usually when I'm working out this way. It sits on my property now. You bought it? I just couldn't bear to see it turn into kitchen cabinets. Oh, do you still read poetry? Yeah, I never stopped. I guess it's in my blood. Do you know you're the only poet I've ever met? I'm no poet. I read, but I can't write a verse. I've tried. You're still a poet, Noah Taylor Calhoun. I still think about it a lot. It was the first time anyone ever read poetry to me before. In fact, it's the only time. Her comment made both of them drift back and remember as they slowly circled back to the house. As the sun dropped a little lower and the sky turned orange, he asked, So, how long are you staying? I don't know, not long, maybe until tomorrow or the next day. Is your fiancé here on business? No, he's still in Raleigh. Does he know you're here? No. I told him I was looking for antiques. He wouldn't question or he wouldn't understand my coming here. Noah was a little surprised by her answer. It was one thing to come and visit, but it was an entirely different matter to hide the truth from her fiancé. You didn't have to come here to tell me you were engaged. You could have written me instead, or even called. I know, but for some reason, I had to do it in person. Why? I don't know. I don't know. And the way she said it, it made him believe her. Allie, do you love him? Yes, I love him. The words hurt, but again he thought he heard something in her tone, as if she were saying it to convince herself. He stopped and gently took her shoulders in his arms and making her face him, and the fading sunlight reflected in her eyes as he spoke. If you're happy, Allie, and you love him, I won't try to stop you from going back to him, but if there's a part of you that isn't sure, then don't do it. This isn't the kind of thing you go into halfway. I'm making the right decision, Noah? He stared for a second, wondering if he believed her. I'm not making this easy for you, huh? Oh, it's okay. I can't really blame you. I'm sorry anyway. Don't be. There's no reason to be sorry. I'm the one who should be apologizing. Maybe I should have written. To be honest, I'm still glad you came. Despite everything. It's good to see you again. Thank you, Noah, thank you. Do you think it would be possible to start over? She looked at him curiously. You were the best friend I ever had, Allie. I'd still like to be friends, even if you are engaged. And even if it is just for a couple of days. How about we just kind of get to know each other again? She thought about it. Thought about staying or leaving, and decided that since he knew about her engagement, it would probably be all right. Or at least not wrong. She smiled, nodded. I'd like that. Good. How about dinner? I know a place that serves the best crab in town. Sounds great. Where? My house. I've had the traps out all week, and I saw that I had some good ones caged a couple of days ago. Do you mind? No. That sounds fine. Great. They're at the dock. I'll just be a couple of minutes. Allie watched him walk away and noticed the tension she felt when telling him about her engagement was beginning to fade. Closing her eyes, she ran her hands through her hair and let the light breeze fan her cheek. She took a deep breath and held it for a moment, feeling the muscles in her shoulders further relax as she exhaled. Finally, opening her eyes, she stared at the beauty that surrounded her. She always loved evenings like this, evenings where the faint aroma of autumn leaves rode on the backs of soft southern winds. She loved the trees and the sounds they made. Listening to them helped her relax even more. After a moment, she turned toward Noah and looked at him, almost as a stranger might. God, he looked good, even after all this time. She watched him as he reached for a rope. He began to pull it. She saw the muscles in his arm flex as he lifted the cage from the water. He let it hang over the river for a moment and shook it, letting most of the water escape. After setting the trap on the dock, he opened it and began to remove the crabs one by one. She started walking toward him then, listening to the crickets chirp, and remembered a lesson from childhood. She counted the number of chirps in a minute and added 29. "67 degrees," she thought as she smiled to herself. She didn't know if it was accurate, but it felt about right. As she walked, she looked around and realized she had forgotten how fresh and beautiful everything seemed here. Over her shoulder, she saw the house in the distance. He had left a couple of lights on, and it seemed to be the only house around, at least the only one with electricity. Out here, outside the town limits, nothing was certain. Thousands of country homes still lacked the luxury of indoor lighting. She stepped on the dock and it creaked under the foot. The sound reminded her of a rusty squeeze box, and Noah glanced up and winked and then went back to checking the crabs. She walked to the rocker that sat on the dock and touched it, running her hand along the deck. She could picture him sitting in it, fishing, thinking, reading. It was old and weather-beaten, rough feeling. She wondered how much time he spent here alone, and she wondered about his thoughts at times like those. "It was my daddy's chair," he said, looking up, and she nodded. She saw bats in the sky. Frogs had joined the crickets in their evening harmony. She walked to the other side of the dock, feeling a sense of closure. A compulsion had driven her here, and for the first time in 3 weeks, the feeling was gone. She'd somehow needed Noah to know about her engagement, to understand, to accept it. She was sure of that now. And while thinking of him, she was reminded of something they'd shared from the summer they were together. With head down, she paced around slowly, looking for it until she found it. The carving. "Noah loves Allie," in a heart, carved into the dock a few days before she'd left. A breeze broke the stillness and chilled her, making her cross her arms. She stood that way, alternately looking down at the carving and then toward the river until she heard him reach her side. She could feel him, his closeness, his warmth. "It's so peaceful here," she said. "I know. I come down here a lot now just to be close to the water. It makes me feel good. I would too if I were you. Come on, let's go. The mosquitoes are going to get, vicious. And I'm starved." The sky had turned black. North darted toward the house, Allie right beside him, and in the silence, her mind wandered and she felt a little lightheaded. She wondered what he was thinking about her being here and wasn't exactly sure if she knew herself. And when they reached the house a couple of minutes later, Clem greeted them with a wet nose in the wrong place. Noah motioned her away, and she left with her tail between her legs. "Did you leave anything in there that you need to get out?" Pointing to her car. "No, I got in earlier and unpacked already." Her voice sounded differently to herself, as if the years had suddenly been undone. "Good enough." He set the bucket by the door. It was on the immediate right, large and smelling of new wood. The kitchen, the cabinets had been done in oak, as was the floor, and the windows were large and faced east, allowing the light from morning sun. It was a tasteful restoration, not overdone, as was common when homes like this were rebuilt. "Do you mind if I look around?" "Oop, go ahead. I did some shopping earlier, and I still have to put the groceries away." Their eyes met for a second, and Allie knew as she turned that he continued to watch her as she left the room. She toured the house for the next few minutes, walking through the rooms. Wonderful, how wonderful it looked. And by the time she'd finished, it was hard to remember how run down it had been. She came down the stairs, turned toward the kitchen, and saw his profile. For a second, he looked like a young man of 17 again, and it made her pause a split second before going, "Oh, damn. Damn," she thought. "Get a hold of yourself, Allie. Remember that you're engaged now." He was standing by the counter, a couple of cabinet doors open wide, empty grocery bags on the floor, whistling quietly. He smiled at her. before putting a few more cans into one of the cabinets. Oh, she paused, leaned on the counter. She shook her head, amazed at how much he had done. It's unbelievable, Noah. How long did this restoration take? Almost a year. Did you do it yourself? No. I always thought I would. When I was young, I started that way, but it was just too much. It would have taken years. So I ended up hiring some people, actually a lot of people. But even with them, it was still a lot of work, and most of the time I didn't stop until past midnight. Why'd you work so hard? Ghosts, he wanted to say, but he didn't. I don't know, just I wanted to finish, I guess. Do you want anything to drink before I start dinner? What do you have? Not much, really. Beer, tea, coffee. Tea. Sounds nice. He gathered the grocery bags and put them away and then walked to a small room off the kitchen before turning with a box of tea. Pulled out a couple of tea bags, set them down by the stove, and then filled the teapot. And after putting it on the burner, he lit a match. She heard the sound of flames as they came to life. It'll be just a minute. This stove heats up pretty quick. That's fine. When the teapot whistled, 2 cups, and then he handed one to her. She smiled, took a sip, and then motioned toward the window. I'll bet the kitchen is beautiful when the morning light, shines in. He nodded. Oh, it is. I had larger windows put in on the side of the house for just that reason, even in the bedrooms upstairs. I'm sure your guests enjoy that, unless, of course, they want to sleep late. Actually, I haven't had any guests stay over yet. Since my daddy passed on, I really don't know who to invite. By his tone, she knew he was feeling something. Yet for some reason, it made her feel lonely. He seemed to realize how she was feeling, but before she could dwell on it, he changed the subject. I'm going to get the crabs in to marinate for a few minutes before I steam them. And he went to the cupboard and removed a large pot. Brought the pot to the sink, water, then carried it to the stove. Can I give you a hand with something? Sure. How about cutting up some vegetables for the fryer? There's plenty in the icebox, and you can find a bowl over there. Oh, he motioned to the cabinet. She carried all the bowl and the vegetables over. Then Noah joined her in front of the open door, and she moved to make room for him. She could smell him as he stood next to her, clean, familiar, distinctive, and felt his arm brush against her as he leaned over and reached inside. He removed a beer and a bottle of hot sauce and then returned to the stove. Noah opened the beer and poured it in the water, then added the hot sauce and some other seasoning as well. And after stirring the water to make sure the powders were dissolved, he went to the back door to get the crabs. He paused for a moment before going back inside and stared at Allie, watching her cut the carrots. And as he did that, he wondered again why she had come, especially now that she was engaged. None of this seemed to make much sense to him. But then, Allie had always been surprising. He smiled to himself. Yes, remembering. Fiery, spontaneous, passionate. Well, as he imagined most artists to be. And she was definitely that. Artistic talent like hers was a gift. He remembered seeing some paintings in the museums in New York and thinking that her work was just as good as what he had seen there. She had given him a painting before she left that summer. It hung above the fireplace in the living room. She called it a picture of her dreams, and to him it had seemed extremely sensual. And when he looked at it, and he often did late in the evening, he could see desire in the colors and the lines, and he focused carefully. He could imagine what she had been thinking with every stroke. Ah. A dog barked in the distance, and Noah realized he'd been standing with the door open a long time. He quickly closed it. Oh, as he walked, he wondered if she had noticed how long he'd been gone. How's it going? Good. I'm almost done here. Anything else for dinner? Well, I've got some homemade bread that I was planning on. Homemade? From a neighbor. He started the faucet and began to rinse the crabs, holding them under the water. Allie picked up her cup and came over to watch him. Aren't you afraid they'll pinch you when you grab them? Nope. Just grab them like this. And he demonstrated, and she smiled. I forget. You've done this, your whole life. New burn's small, but it does teach you how to do the things that matter. She leaned against the counter, standing close to him, and emptied her cup. And when the crabs were ready, he put them in the pot on the stove. He washed his hands, turning to speak to her. You want to sit on the porch for a few minutes? I'd like to let them soak for half an hour. Sure. He wiped his hands, and they went to the back porch. Noah flipped on the light as they went outside, and he sat in the old rocker, offering the newer one to her. And when he saw her cup was empty, he went inside, emerged with another cup of tea and a beer for himself. He held out the cup, and she took it, sipping again before she set it on the table beside the chairs. You were sitting out here when I came, weren't you? He answered as he made himself comfortable. Yeah, I sit out here every night as a habit now. I can see why. So what is it you do these days? Actually, I don't do anything but work on the house right now, and it satisfies my creative urges. How can you? I mean, Morris Goldman. Excuse me? My old boss. From up north? His name was Morris Goldman. He offered me a part of the business just as I enlisted and died before I got home. And when I got back to the States, his lawyers gave me a check big enough to buy this place and fix it up. You always told me you'd find a way to do it. They both sat quietly. Allie took another cup of tea, and then, do you remember sneaking over here the night you first told me about this place? He nodded, and she went on. I got home a little late that evening, and my parents were furious when I finally came in. I can still picture my daddy standing in the living room smoking a cigarette, my mother on the sofa staring straight ahead. I swear, they looked as if a family member had died. That was the first time my parents knew I was serious about you. And my mother had a long talk with me later that night. She said to me, I'm sure you think that I don't understand what you're going through, but I do. It's just that sometimes our future is dictated by what we are as opposed to what we want. I remember being really hurt when she said that. We're dictated by what we are as opposed to what we want. You told me about it the next day. It hurt my feelings, too. I liked your parents, and I had no idea they didn't like me. It wasn't that they didn't like you. They didn't think you deserved me. That's not much of a difference. There was a sadness in her voice when he responded, and she knew he was right to feel that way. She looked toward the stars while she ran her hand through her hair. I know that. I always did. Maybe that's why my mother and I always seem to have a distance between us when we talk. How do you feel about it now? Well, the same as I did back then. That it's wrong. That it isn't fair. It was a terrible thing for a girl to learn that status is more important than feelings. Noah smiled softly at her answer, but said nothing. I thought about you ever since that summer. You have? Why wouldn't you think so? You never answered my letters. You wrote? Dozens of letters. I wrote for 2 years without receiving a single reply. She shook her head. I didn't know. And he knew it must have been her mother. Checking the mail, removing the letters without her knowledge. It was what he had always suspected. And he watched as Allie came to the same realization. It was wrong of her to do that, Noah. And I'm sorry she did, but we'll try to understand. Once I left, she probably thought it would be easier for me to just let it go. She never understood how much you meant to me. And to be honest, I don't even know if she ever loved my father the way I loved you. In her mind, she was just trying to protect my feelings, and she probably thought the best way to do that was to hide the letters you sent. That wasn't her decision to make. I know, would have made a difference, even if you'd got them. Of course, I always wondered what you were up to. No, I mean with us. Do you think we would have made it? It took a moment for her to answer. I don't know. I don't know, Noah. I really don't, and you don't either. We're not the same people we were then. We've changed. We've grown, both of us. But yes, Noah, I think we would have. At least, I'd like to think we would have. What's Lon like? She hesitated, not expecting the question. Bringing up Lon's name brought slight feelings of guilt to the surface, and for a moment she didn't know how to answer. She reached for a cup, took another sip of tea, and listened as a woodpecker tapped in the distance. She spoke quietly. Lon's handsome, old, charming, and successful, and most of my friends are insanely jealous. They think he's perfect, and in a lot of ways he is. He's kind to me, he makes me laugh, and I know he loves me in his own way. But there's always going to be something missing in our relationship. She surprised herself with her answer, but knew it was true. And she also knew by looking at him that Noah had suspected the answer in advance. Why? Her voice was barely above a whisper. I guess I still look for the kind of love we had that summer. Noah thought about what she had said for a long time, thinking about the relationships he had had since he'd last seen her. How about you? Did you ever think about us all the time? I still do. Are you seeing anyone? No. Both of them seemed to think about that, trying but finding it impossible to displace from their minds. Noah finished his beer. I'm going to go start the water. Can I get you anything? She shook her head. Noah went to the kitchen, put the crabs in. He found some flour and cornmeal for the vegetables, coated them, and put some grease into the frying pan. And after turning the heat on low, he got a timer and pulled another beer from the icebox before heading back to the porch. And while he was doing those things, he thought about Allie and the love that was missing from both their lives. He knew it. Allie, too, was thinking about Noah, about herself, about a lot of things. For a moment, she wished she weren't engaged, but then quickly cursed herself. It wasn't Noah she loved. She loved what they once had been. Besides, it was normal to feel that way. Her first real love, the only man she'd ever been with. How could she expect to forget him? Yet, was it normal for her insides to be twitching whenever he came near? Was it normal to confess things she could never tell anyone else? Was it normal to come here 3 weeks before her wedding day? No, it's not. There's nothing normal about any of this. Noah came out at that moment and she smiled at him, glad he'd come back so she didn't have to think. It's going to take a few minutes, he said as he sat back down. Oh, that's fine. I'm not that hungry yet. I'm glad you came, Allie. Me too. I almost didn't, though. Why did you come? I was compelled, she wanted to say, but didn't. Just to see you, to find out what you've been up to, and to see how you are. He wondered if that was all, but didn't question further. He changed the subject. By the way, I've been meaning to ask, do you still paint? Not anymore. Why not? You have so much talent. I don't know. Sure you do. You stopped for a reason. He was right. She'd had a reason. It's a long story. I've got all night. Did you really think I was talented? Come on. I want to show you something. She got up, followed him through the door to the living room, and he stopped and pointed to the painting that hung above the mantel. She gasped, surprised. She hadn't noticed it earlier, more surprised it was here at all. You kept it. Of course I kept it. It's wonderful. She gave him a skeptical look, and he explained, it makes me feel alive when I look at it. Sometimes I have to get up and touch it. It's just so real. The shapes, the shadows, the colors. I even dream about it sometimes. It's incredible, Allie. I can stare at it for hours. You're serious. As serious as I've ever been. She didn't say anything. Mean to tell me no one has ever told you that before? Well, my professor did, but I guess I didn't believe him. He knew there was more. Allie looked away before continuing. I've been drawing and painting since I was a child. I guess that once I got a little older, I began to think I was good at it. I enjoyed it too. I remember working on the painting that summer, adding to it every day, changing it as our relationship changed. I don't even remember how it started or what I wanted it to be, but somehow it evolved into this. I remember being unable to stop painting after I went home that summer. I think it was my way of avoiding the pain I was going through, missing you. Anyway, I ended up majoring in art in college because it was something I had to do. I remember spending hours in the studio all by myself and enjoying every minute. I loved the freedom I felt when I created, the way it made me feel inside to make something beautiful. Oh, just before I graduated, my professor, who happened to also be the critic for the paper, told me I had a lot of talent. He told me I should try my luck as an artist. But I didn't listen to him. My parents didn't think it was proper for someone like me to paint for a living. I just stopped after a while. I haven't touched a brush in years. She stared at the painting. Do you think you'll ever paint again? I'm not sure if I can anymore. It's been a long time. Huh. You can still do it, Allie. I know you can. You have a talent that comes from inside you, from your heart, not from your fingers. What you have can't ever go away. It's what other people only dream about. You're an artist, Allie. The words were spoken with such sincerity. He truly believed in her ability. And for some reason, that meant more to her than she expected. But something else happened then, something even more powerful. Why it happened, she never knew, but this was when the chasm began to close for Allie, the chasm she had erected in her life to separate the pain from the pleasure. And she suspected then, maybe not consciously, that there was more to this than even she cared to admit. But at that moment, she still wasn't completely aware of it, and she turned to face him. She reached over and touched his hand hesitantly, gently, amazed that after all these years, he'd somehow known exactly what she needed to hear. When their eyes locked, she once again realized how special he was. And for just a fleeting moment, a tiny wisp of time that hung in the air like fireflies in summer skies, she wondered if she was in love with him again.